Begin.
I love stories. Ever since I was in third grade, my favorite part of the day would be crawling into bed with my little sister Lily and reading her a story. Whether it was solving a mystery with super sleuth Nancy Drew or soaring with Peter Pan and Wendy, the stories frightened, surprised, and thrilled us. In each story, the protagonist would face his or her fears, overcome a problem, and be victorious. But it wasn't until the setting and plot line of my own story changed that I realized that fear wasn't quite so fun. My story began like this. On my first trip to Europe, the Netherlands, I was there to stay, to live. The Neverlands, as my little sister used to call it. Wait, wrong book. This wasn't where Peter Pan takes Wendy to meet the Lost Boys, but boy was I lost. I was frightened and overwhelmed by the new food. Raw fish, mayonnaise on french fries. The new language, Goedemorgen, ik ben zenuwachtig. And the new international school with students representing over 70 different nationalities, many of which I hadn't even heard of before. It was a real culture shock. How would I fit into this new setting? How would the plot unfold? I was facing a fear that turning the pages wasn't going to solve. The fear of the unknown. Today, we will begin by opening to the table of contents to understand how and why we biologically fear the unknown. Next, we'll keep reading to see some of fear's negative impacts in our society. And finally, we will conclude by trying to find a positive resolution for our fear story. The fear of the unknown is unavoidable. The amygdala, located in the limbic system of the brain, is unconsciously triggered when we perceive a dangerous stimuli. As our body involuntarily undergoes a fight or flight stress response, we react by either running away or fighting back. Flight or fight. Our instinct of fear drives our behavior. Currently, it seems like we have a lot to fear. Daily, we are bombarded with round-the-clock notifications of latest news headlines constructed to get our attention. Alert. Margie Kerr, sociologist at the University of Pittsburgh, states, studies have correlated hours of news consumption with reported levels of anxiety and fear. We are being conditioned to believe we are not safe, and we fear the unknown. So we watch more, listen more, and Google more. Ironically, according to Barry Glasner, president of the Lewis and Clark College, most Americans are living in the safest place in the safest time in human history. Yet we are afraid for our safety. We are fearful of strangers, and we fear the unknown. And so it begins. The mass media makes us uneasy, makes us anxious, and makes us expect the worst. Enter a dark stranger. His name, xenophobia. According to Webster's dictionary, xenophobia is defined as the fear or hatred of foreigners, people from different cultures, and strangers. Our parents and teachers worked hard to teach us the importance of the stranger danger lesson, but that is one lesson we have learned too well. Interacting with and accepting people of foreign cultures adds tension to the story, because it introduces the subplot of the unknown. Again, our fight or flight response kicks in. Flight is the reaction of people who choose to ignore those of different cultures. Fight, sadly, is the response that fills our news headlines with stories of hate crimes. According to the Washington Post, on March 3, 2017, Deep Rai, a Sikh man, was shot and injured in front of his house in a Seattle suburb, reportedly after the attacker shouted, "Go back to your country." Rai's story is far from unique. The conflict in our story is escalating. Plot twist. I am a child of immigrant parents. However, I have not faced this discrimination because the way I look, speak, and live, I fit right in. My parents came to the U.S. 18 years ago to live the American dream, and I'm loving it. A Canadian living in the US does not face the same difficulties because we're a known character in a familiar story. When we understand little about a foreign culture, there is little chance that we will be able to accept people based on their differences. And while on the subject of little things, as Yoda once said, fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering. Right now, some of us are fearing our unwritten futures. America's story is changing with the results of the presidential election. Some are choosing the flight response. On the night of the election, Canada's immigration website crashed because it had so many hits. But others are fighting. According to NBC News on March 14, 2017, hate crimes in 9 U.S. metropolitan areas rose more than 20%, reaching over a total of 1,000 incidents. So how can we face this fear? How did our favorite characters do it in the stories we cherished as children? With courage, compassion, and comprehension. First, courage. All of our favorite heroes rely on courage to face the unknown. I would encourage you to think before you judge, reason before you react. Second, compassion. Fable figures taught us to love one another even before we learned how to read. While your amygdala is there to protect you, you cannot let your brain's fight or flight response control you. As psychologist Alfred Adler once said, follow your heart, but take your brain with you. And lastly, comprehension. The protagonist always experiences a learning curve before he or she is able to solve the problem. I believe that our learning curve comes with education and knowledge. According to an article from Johns Hopkins University, multicultural education requires critical thinking, imagination, a commitment to a better tomorrow, and an inclusive of the wealth of all of our stories. As high schoolers, we are often only exposed to the culture of the second language we are learning, such as Spanish, French, or German. Imagine if we were offered classes about nationalities of an array of cultures of an array of global nationalities in elementary, middle, and high school. When we are educated about foreign cultures in schools, we won't grow up fearing the unknown. From philosopher Plato, we can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light. Right now, I fear my little sister will grow up in a story where the protagonist doesn't always prosper because of the way the author placed the origin of the character. The illustrator drew the color of the character's skin because our fear ruined the true plot of the story. So, how did my story end? When I landed in the Netherlands, I was fearful at first. I wanted to get on the next flight and leave. Instead, I fought by resisting to make new friends and protesting against my parents. But gradually, as the unknown became the known, I adjusted my perspective to a growth mindset, and I learned to value and appreciate the diversity of the experience. This fall, I moved back to Iowa, and I entered as a foreigner to another new school. But this time, I know to resist the power of my amygdala and not to judge others. My hope is that those who meet me do the same when I tell them my story. Thank you.